What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There is a strange unwritten rule that has shaped modern Russia for more than 2 decades. The government pretends not to see people, and the people pretend not to see the government. Simple as that. Both sides look the other way, both sides avoid direct confrontation, both sides insist on a quiet arrangement where nobody asks uncomfortable questions. This mutual blindness became the foundation of Putin's entire domestic stability. It kept society numb, it kept the bureaucracy unbothered, and for years it worked so flawlessly that many Russians forgot it was even happening. But now the war has blown off dust of everything. Suddenly the old pact is collapsing. Suddenly the government has begun scavenging through every single corner of their own economy looking for cash. And suddenly the Kremlin is showing up everywhere it promised it would never look. And that change is not some minor bureaucratic shift, no way. It is a seismic break in the social contract and a warning about how desperate the state has become. So today, let's talk about 2 new absurd ways of how Putin literally robs his society to fund the war nobody but him wants. To understand why today's economic chaos is so explosive, we have to go back to how the don't ask, don't tell model originally worked. For years, the Kremlin did not even try to track every ruble each person earned. They knew it was just pointless, too costly, too revealing, and if you were repairing cars, for example, in your garage for a bit of cash or tutoring students after work, nobody cared. Unless you made like millions, which unlikely. If you ran a small online shop or resold iPhones from abroad every time your relatives traveled, the government simply looked the other way. Not because they were generous, but because they were terrified of the questions they would be forced to answer if they poked too deeply. I mean, just imagine a tax inspector approaching a school teacher making 30,000 rubles a month, like $400 a month, and demanding that she declare her tutoring side income. She would then immediately start being outraged, asking questions like why would she need a side job in the first place? Why her official salary is too small to live on? Where her taxes are actually going? Why the government expects loyalty without providing the bare minimum of dignity in return? I mean, that single interaction could unravel the entire illusion of stability. And nobody in power wanted that. So instead of poking the bear, the government crafted a simpler system. They would slice the top of people's money pie through VAT increases, price markups, fossil fuel sales, and corporate taxes. Everything that people did not even know they were paying, possibly. They would allow people to hustle informally as long as those people then kept spending in supermarkets, paying indirect taxes without even noticing. I know the plumber who fixed a leaky toilet for 1,000 rubles extra might not be taxed directly on that income. Like $10, come on. But the moment he bought groceries or paid for fuel, the government quietly took its cut. And as long as that money kept flowing, the government, the Kremlin specifically, played the role of a distant, uninterested landlord. It repaved roads, paid pensions, kinda, funded schools just enough to avoid collapse, but never enough to be held accountable. During the pandemic lockdowns, for example, when Western governments scrambled to issue emergency aid, Russia simply shrugged. No help, no outrage, no nothing, no expectations. People already knew that the state was not there for them. They will not receive any payment checks or whatever. They had been trained not to ask. That was this so-called Russian equilibrium. The government pretended to govern, and the people pretended to obey. And together they drifted forward, each side desperately hoping the other would not break this illusion. But then something extremely expensive happened. Putin invaded Ukraine, maxed out all his credit cards, shook all his oligarchs to help him repay the debt, and it was still not enough. That was the very first instability that caused the unspoken equilibrium to tip in one direction. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. Illusion collapses the moment reality runs out of money. And the Kremlin has finally hit that wall. With budget deficits swelling and wartime costs skyrocketing, the government has started clawing at every available corner of the economy. Not because it wants to, no, but because it has to. They are scraping the barrel so aggressively that even dust itself started looking like revenue. The most infuriating example hit Russian motorists, for example. For years, anyone importing a modest car paid 5,000 stable ruble utilization fee. A manageable, predictable expense, $60, nothing much. But starting November 1st this year, the Kremlin slapped astronomical commercial rates on nearly all vehicles about 160 horsepower. Meaning suddenly people were forced to pay 100, 200, even 300 times more than before. Just for example, a million-ruble fee for a used Kia imported through Kazakhstan. A tax bomb literally wrapped in bureaucratic indifference. And you heard it right, imagine paying twice the price for already affordable car and used one. This literally turned Toyotas into Mercedeses and Mercedes into Rolls-Royces overnight. The one brand untouched, as some of you guys guessed it, Ladas. Of course Ladas, it's just gotta be Ladas. So naturally people became outraged, not only because the fee itself is absurd, but because it attacks the only workaround many Russians had left. After Western automakers already fled their country, unofficial imports became the lifeline that kept families mobile. People learned to buy themselves used cars from Korea, rebuild them, reprogram them, nurse them back into functionality. I mean, it was not glamorous, but it kept them moving from A to B in a world where dealerships vanished overnight. And now the state has stomped to this fragile ecosystem with a sledgehammer. It does not matter that the unofficial import market was literally born from government incompetence. It does not matter that Russians spent 3 years rebuilding domestic access to cars without any help from the Kremlin, literally everything by themselves, helping on the forums, Reddits, things like this. It does not matter that the government's new fees will kill the entire industry while bringing in pocket change revenue, because not too many people will now be able to afford cars in the first place. But what truly matters is that Moscow is desperate, and desperation rarely thinks about consequences. The same thing has happened in literally every sector. Businesses spend their own money reinventing supply chains. Consumers learn to survive without warranties, without official service, without company support. Entrepreneurs sorted out problems created by the government while the government claimed victory and pretended nothing had changed. But the moment these private efforts made Russia appear stable, the Kremlin took it as a justification to squeeze harder. You can almost visualize this absurd logic, quote-unquote. I mean, look, the people solved it, so surely they can handle a little bit more pressure, right? Except that this time the pressure is crushing the very adaptations that kept the economy afloat. If you constantly apply pressure, at some point everything breaks, no matter how tough it is. You've seen the hydraulic press videos, right? This was the first absurd way of Putin stealing even more money from his people. This ridiculous import fee that doubled the price almost every single car. But the Kremlin, guess what, did not stop there. Next target for them became the self-employed people. The very people who wanted to do nothing with the government, and who Kremlin did not want to touch either. This was the essence of Russian people/government equilibrium relationship, which has now been broken. Let's talk about it in more details in our next chapter. Nothing illustrates this madness better than the latest war on self-employed workers. These are the English tutors, photographers, hairdressers, handymen, freelance designers, online sellers, basically millions of Russian people who helped themselves survive when the official salaries collapsed and large companies downsized. These are the people who required no subsidy, no support, no aid from the government. The people who reported their own income voluntarily and paid taxes willingly, some of them at least. Just a miracle in modern Russia. And yet, the government now sees them not as allies, not as lifelines, but as a treasure chest filled with untapped rubles. The Kremlin has convinced itself that the self-employed sector hides trillions waiting to be extracted. Economic Minister, for example, Maxim Reshetnikov, first floated the idea of shaking the entire system by 2028. And now, the Federal Council wants it gone by 2026. Faster, harsher, more decisive. This is madness if you ask me. Self-employment was one and only successful reforms of the late Putin era. It legalized work. It made people visible without punishing them. It allowed Russians to survive economic downturns by building parallel safety nets independent of the state. And now the Kremlin wants to tear it apart in a frantic search for money that does not actually exist to sponsor the thing nobody wants. The pattern is just unmistakable and ridiculous. The government wants to tax the unemployed through mandatory insurance payments. It wants small businesses to pay VAT on transactions that barely keep them alive in the first place. It wants individuals, not corporations, to patch the federal budgets. All because the war has become so bottomless pit that someone just has to feed it. But every ruble the government grabs now comes at the cost of long-term stability. They are burning the bridge that once carried them through previous crises. This is literally the example of Putin going all in. It is either he wins everything soon enough and eases the demands on the people, or he lives long enough to see everything collapse. Or, well, there is actually a third scenario, maybe he just does not live long enough to witness anything. There's literally nothing in between. Russia has weathered economic shocks before, 2008, 14, 2020. Each time the pattern was pretty much same. The Kremlin stepped aside, allowed private citizens to adapt, and quietly enjoyed the results. It never helped, but at least it did not interfere. The ingenuity of ordinary Russians filled the gaps. They rebuilt supply chains, found alternatives, worked around shortages. They turned chaos into survival routine. But this time, the government is not stepping aside. It is stepping on people's throats. It is interfering everywhere. In cars, in freelance work, in imports, in taxes, in micro-businesses. It is hunting for revenue in places where only financial dust remains. It is dismantling social mechanisms that allowed individuals to survive without begging the state for help. And it is doing all this not to stabilize the economy, not to build the future, not to invest in anything meaningful by all means, but to prolong a war the Kremlin cannot afford and definitely cannot decisively win. The war that destroys future itself. This is the first ever downturn in modern Russian history where the government is actively making the recession worse, not by incompetence, but by choice. Because the Kremlin's priority is no longer economic survival, it is a wartime survival. It is bond payments, military factories, propaganda budgets. It is the illusion of strength maintained at any price. And what about the people? Well, there is simply collateral damage in financial trench that the government keeps digging deeper. The Kremlin is smashing through every boundary it once respected, it once erased itself. It is taxing the poor, punishing the resourceful, sabotaging industrious, and suffocating the very single people who kept Russia afloat through past crises. It is breaking this old contract without offering anything in return. The government simply needs money right now, immediately, desperately, recklessly. And it will keep researching and reaching deeper even if it burns the economy that feeds it. Because for the Kremlin, the war must continue even if the country collapses under its weight. Putin simply does not need Russia to win. He only needs Putin not to lose. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work and join our private Telegram group where I'll be answering your questions, the links are down below. You can do so by becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. Thanks much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway.